This is
RedPubPod.
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 a podcast
RedPubPod.
RedPubPod.
from Red Hot Publications.
RedPubPod.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening out there in podcast land. You're listening to Red Pub Pod. I'm here today with our terrific and absolute acquisitions editor, Patty Thompson. Manuscripts don't get in the door if Patty don't let them in the door, so always be nice to Patty. I'm Robert Knipe. I'm the guy that does everything nobody else wants to do around here, and today we are here with a published writer, but is yet published by us. Usually when we do our podcast, it's a book that's published and you can go to the website and buy it. But this one you can't even pre-order yet because we are doing some marketing work on this book. It's called Filling the Big Empty. So let's welcome Rhonda Browning White. Welcome.
Welcome,
Rhonda.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
Good. I'm glad you're happy to be here because we're happy to have you. So out there in podcast land, thanks for joining us. Patty, where do you want to start?
Well, you know what? Rhonda's got a really interesting backstory, a very interesting backstory in terms of how she ended up here in North Carolina. So if you don't mind, we could read the bio, but that's boring. Want to give us a little short story on where you're from and how you ended up in North Carolina?
How you ended up in Hickory, North Carolina, of all places.
Hickory, right. So, well, actually, I am from North Carolina at one point. I grew up in West Virginia, and then I moved to North Carolina around the age of 19, lived here in Greensboro and High Point for about 13 or 14 years. Then went back to West Virginia. My husband had a job in West Virginia with Mountain State University, which is where he met this wonderful person named Patty Thompson.
That's right.
Back in the day. And anyway, we were transferred to Florida at Mountain State University, and we were down there for 17 years and had our fill of hurricanes and insurance related to hurricanes and that such, as everyone now in North Carolina understands on an all too clear level. So we wanted to move back up the mountains. Plus, we needed to be closer to our families. And so my family's still in West Virginia. He has family in Tennessee. We split the distance in Hickory, North Carolina.
That makes sense.
And I am thrilled to be here. I love this town. I really do. I can't say enough good things about Hickory and Catawba County and the general vicinity. It's just beautiful here and such nice people.
I bet you were really worried when these hurricanes started following you up here to the mountains.
I felt there like I had a magnet attached to me. Yeah. I just brought them with me.
So for those of you who aren't from the state of North Carolina, western North Carolina was just devastated with Hurricane Helene lately, and we've had tornadoes on the tops of mountains and floods and things like that, like they're used to in like you say, Florida.
But not so much here. And so, and I will say, having lived in Florida myself and moved here in the 17 or 18 years I've lived here, this was the biggest one we've had. So welcome to Florida, North Carolina.
Thank you. I'll do my best to keep them away if I have any.
Please
don't think I have any ability, but I wish I did.
And if you don't mind also, in addition to your background geographically, let us know a little bit about your writing journey, because you are an established, published author, and I think for folks out there that might not be as familiar with published authors, a lot of times many of our authors it's their first time when they come with us. Let us know a little bit about your journey in writing and your previous book, The Lightness of Water and Other Stories, which was a fabulous short story collection, I might add.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah, I've done a lot of writing of short stories and poetry and had a lot of that published in some well-respected literary magazines, so I'm very blessed to have had that kind of favor on my life, and I worked hard to get to this point. I'm still working hard, and I'm going to keep on pounding. But yeah, The Lightness of Water and Other Stories came out in 2019. It won the Short Fiction Award for, let's see, how should I say this? Press 53 Short Fiction Award in 2019. And it's received a couple of other awards since then. Some of the short stories in that collection received a couple of awards. So, it's been really nice to have that recognition. And I took two of those stories from The Lightness of Water, which was the first story in the collection and the last story in the collection. Those were written by two different points of view of a couple, Romy and Jasper Grodin. And those two characters just stuck with me. They wouldn't leave me alone. Over the course of the next 4 years or so, I kept thinking about them and jotting down things that they might have said had they continued their story. So I wrote that down and created a novel, which is now Filling the Big Empty.
Great.
Yeah.
So the short story book is available from Press 53.
Correct, in Winston-Salem,
Press
North Carolina.
53 out of Winston-Salem. So folks out there in podcast land, set your browsers to Press 53 and your search engines and see if you can pick that up. Probably available at Amazon as well.
It is.
It is. So pick that up. That'll give you some short stories and some kind of preface to some of the situations and characters that's in the upcoming Filling the Big Empty.
And in addition to being an established author, and of course this being your first novel, you are also our writer workshop instructor.
Right.
You've got an interesting background in that not only are you teaching writing for adults here at Catawba Valley Community College for Red Hawk Publications, but you're also a student still yourself. I mean, you attend workshops. You also lead workshops.
Correct.
You've got your graduate degree. You've got an MFA creative writing.
Mm-hmm.
Could you share with us a little bit about your journey in learning the craft of writing?
I don't think it ever ends, Patty. I mean, really, if you're wanting to be a good author, you're going to be learning from other authors and from your readers. I learn as much from my readers and my students as I do a good craft of writing book. That's why I love teaching, and I'm so pleased to be here teaching through Red Hawk Publications at CVCC, teaching adults in creative writing. They ask some very pointed, very difficult questions sometimes, which puts me back to the research end of things. And I love falling down that Alice in Wonderland rabbit hole of research, and I learn as I go. So they keep me sharp, and I feel like every serious writer needs to be reading craft of writing books. They really do. We can always improve. Just like with, I work in healthcare as well, and our doctors are continually studying and they're continually going back to school. And that's what I feel like I need to do as a writer. I need to continue the study of the craft.
That's one of the reasons why I became a college professor, is because you get to be a professional student.
Exactly. You're
You get
on
to
it, Robert. Yes.
get to learn all the time. So,
That's right.
what are some of your major influences? Who are some of the authors that you like to read?
Oh, well, I love Appalachian authors, of course.
Okay.
Southern authors. Those are my favorites. I'll read anything. I'll read a cereal box, Robert. It doesn't matter. If it's got words on it, I'm going to read it. But I love Lee Smith. I love Bonnie Jo Campbell. Ron Rash. I can't say enough good things about him. He's another amazing North Carolina author who was just inducted into, what is it, the North Carolina?
Hall of Fame,
Yeah.
Hall of Literary Fame by the North Carolina Writers Network.
There you go, right. I mean, that was a really nice award there. Well-deserved, too. Even the older writers no longer with us, Ernest Hemingway, Flannery O'Connor, I dig deep into those because they have such fabulous examples for modern-day writers. And a lot of their subject matter is pertinent still today. And I think that's what makes a really good story, is if you can write not so much about, the times that you're in, which is also important, but those things that affect the human condition, love, loss, greed, guilt, all those things that we each experience in our own emotions. If you can tap into that in your writing, then you can, your readers are going to resonate with that. They're going to feel what you're writing, and then they'll like your work.
I've got a question, and I know, Robert, you're so much more read than I am. Excuse me. Going from short story to a novel, and this is your first novel, what was the biggest challenge? What helped you do this? Because I'm sure it's not as easy to go from a short story to a novel.
They're two different beasts.
Mm-hmm.
They're two different beasts. They really are. It's not just taking a short story and expanding it. A novel takes more than that.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's easier to write a novel than a short story, even though it takes a lot more time to write a novel. And even though if you have a short story that fails, it's easier to rip up 25 pages than it is 325 pages. But at the same time, you've got a lot more time to expand your thoughts and, make things happen. In a novel, you can lay some groundwork. You can kind of stretch your legs, so to speak. But in a short story, it's got to be tight and right. I mean, you really have to compress everything into smaller a smaller space, but also you've still got to get that beginning, middle, end, the satisfaction for the tying up everything with a big bow at the end, kind of sensation that you need in a novel. You got to compress that in a short story. And even harder, I'm starting to play around with flash fiction, which you would think would be super simple.
And would you make sure you define
It's anything but.
define what flash fiction is?
Sure.
Because there's folks that might not know what it is, but I'm fascinated by it.
Me too. I'm fascinated with how difficult it is to write it, and I'm learning to be intimidated by it a little bit, but I'm not going to be stopped. I'm going to keep going. Flash fiction is usually, depending on the genre you're writing for, 1 or 2 pages. Some people will call flash fiction, 250 words, and some will say that they'll accept 1,000 words or less. So it really depends. But there's microfiction that might be, a page or a paragraph. I've seen contests for 25-word stories. Press 53 does a 53-word story every month that they publish on their website. And it's real interesting to try to fit something into 53 words and have it be a concise story. But if you think about it, we tell those stories every day in our life, right? We sit around in a coffee shop like Tasteful Beans and we tell stories, right? That's what we do. And that can be a 53-word story if it's concise and well written. But flash fiction still needs that beginning, middle, end. And that's kind of tough to do, especially if you ramble like I do.
There's an apocryphal story about a contest between Hemingway and F. Scott Fitzgerald as to who could write the shortest story, and it is said that Hemingway won by
6-word story?
Yes, baby shoes.
Mm-hmm.
For sale, baby shoes, never worn.
Short story.
What a heartbreaking short story. I mean, if that's not emotional, nothing
And
is.
it's apocryphal. A lot of people say that didn't happen, and it's this, that, and the other thing. But I've taught flash fiction in my English classes, both in the writing classes and in the literature classes. And I'm fascinated at what some of these people can do with 100 words. There's one that I teach called Paring Knife that is just full of resonance, and I teach it because of the things it doesn't say as well as what it does say. I ask the students all the time what the sex of or the gender of the narrator is, and they'll say a guy, and I'll go, but it never says in the story. He just talks about the woman I love, or the narrator just talks about the woman I love. Never is he or she identified as to what gender they are. And that makes them say, wow, I've got to pay closer attention to what the story actually says. And that's what you're doing with flash fiction, is you're really paring down everything, but you're also saying things by what you leave out.
Exactly.
You're making commentary.
Yeah, well-known author Robert Olmstead, Robert Olmstead, he taught in our MFA program that you should never spell out everything, that you should talk about A and C in your story, but don't conjoin them. Let the reader do that. And I think that's important because that makes the reader a part of the story, because they're putting, what they know and what their experience is into the story as they read it. And they become a part of it. I think that's real important.
Okay, now I'm just dying to talk about the book, because you mentioned something that triggered when I read this. And just so folks out there know, in terms of the process of writing a book and publishing a book, I tend to want to read the entire book that we publish towards the very end, because I will be a final pair of eyes, picking up things. Maybe if we've made some typos or graphic errors or something, I'll pick it up. But it's also an opportunity for me to read a book. And in the case of this, I have to be careful. I am not a professional proofreader. I'm a reader who tries to read carefully. So I will catch things, but let's make no pretense I'm not a professional at proofreading. As I read this, there was something that jumped out at me, and I remember just making a mental highlight. And I had a feeling, whoa, this is such an important sentence right here. I wonder if there's going to be, is this foreshadowing? And I think it was. And I'm very mindful not to give too much away.
I was about to say spoiler alert.
No. And I won't do that. Well, maybe I will. Spoiler alert.
You may now fast forward through the podcast until we give you the tone.
But I think as an author, you might enjoy the fact that I picked up on something early, and sure enough, I saw it throughout. One of your characters, very early in the story, says something about every man makes a choice.
Sure.
We all have choices. And I'm thinking, that's a heavy thing to say. And then in the middle of the book, you've got another character that questions, did I have a choice? Did I not have a choice? I don't know. And then at the very end of the book, there's another character that basically says, it's predestined. There are no choices. Everything, a spiritual being knows what everything's going to happen to us. And so it was kind of a theme that resonated with me. And was that intentional?
And that's what you can do in a novel that is harder to do in a short story.
Yes,
right there in a cocoon is the answer.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think I hope that the theme that's running through this on some level, and I don't think I really know the theme of a novel until I finish it, but I feel like the theme of this one, if I had to put it in a word, is grace. And I feel like my characters, each of them, just like each of us, has the opportunity to accept the grace that's given to us or to refuse it. And my characters have choices just like we do. And let me tell you, they make some bad choices in this novel. They don't always make the best choices. Just like in real life, we don't always make the best choices. But we still have that opportunity to accept grace. And I feel like that's God's grace. That's my personal belief. And my characters don't always align with my personal beliefs because they're fictional characters. Just like people that I meet on the street don't always align with my personal beliefs. And that's okay. That's where we're all different. And we all come from different backgrounds and sexes and races and cultures. And, I don't try to make those in my characters. I don't try to make them mine. I try to let them be my fictional characters' beliefs. But I do hope that grace runs through this story, and I know the character you're talking about, and it's okay to say her name is Missy. There are multiple characters in here, but Missy is one of the secondary characters, actually, and she's had a lot that's happened to her, and she has the opportunity to make a right choice or a wrong choice, and I feel like she accepted that grace. I feel like she accepted God's grace on her life, but she still made a bad choice afterward, and that's what we do, as Christians, Christians make mistakes all the time, y'all. I'm a shining example of that. But we do have God's grace on our life. And does God know ahead of time that we're going to screw up? I think He does. He created us. He knows we're going to make those mistakes. And He loved us anyway.
Yeah.
And that's the most amazing part. And I hope that shines through in the novel, even though it's not what you would call a religious novel, I hope, right?
No, as a matter of fact, I think I was texting you as I was reading your book, because Aria by Cassidy Collins, that's another novel we did, but it was YA. I remember reading her YA novel and wanting to slap consistently her main character. Her main character was annoying as heck, but it's a teenager, I expect it, right?
Sure.
Bad choices. So as I'm reading this, I'm seeing the bad choices, and of course I want to slap some of your characters, some more than others. But to be honest with you, I think I texted you. It's like, if it weren't for bad choices, we wouldn't have many books, would we?
There wouldn't be any stories.
There wouldn't be a Bible. I mean,
right.
heck, the big bad choice made in the beginning, if one wants to go there, right?
You can't have redemption without mistakes.
There you go.
And the redemption
Like
story
that.
is what
I like that.
the redemption story is what we're looking for.
Hey, write that down. I'm going to use it in my
Redemption.
next story.
Yeah, you can't have redemption without mistakes.
That's true.
I mean,
So it was fun to see how, and this is a young couple. For the most part, many of our characters here are quite young, but you do see them mature.
Yeah.
And you do see them settling down. And you do see that, okay, you know what, this couple's going to be okay. They're still
Maybe.
Yeah, exactly.
Maybe.
They still live in West Virginia. Let's not take that out of the equation. But at the same time, they're a lot more settled. And I've seen maturity and growth in your characters.
Good. I like that. Well, somebody might be wondering what in the world this story's about, since we really haven't addressed what it's about. So this Filling the Big Empty is the story of a young married couple, and the story is told in alternating points of view from the wife, Romy Grodin and her husband Jasper Grodin. So by having those alternating chapters, we see, their two opinions on things that are happening to them, and we also see how they sometimes misunderstand one another, which is what we do in real life, right? So I think that adds a level of conflict to the novel. You might say one thing and I perceive it totally different than the way you meant it. And that's the way we are in real life. But I think it really shows up in these fictional characters. And we see, when one makes a bad choice, how it affects the other one, or how one, when they're hiding a secret from the other, that plays out, and how that can create more misunderstandings down the road. So I think those things, give this story a lot of forward momentum. And even though it's fictional, I think some of that is reflected in real life as well. But it's set starts out in coal mining country in West Virginia, and the couple moved to North Carolina, and they find out in North Carolina that there is trouble follows you wherever you go. You can't run from it, and that was one of Romy's big things, is that she tended to pick up and run every time something bad happens to her. And you can't outrun trouble. You can't outrun your family. You can't outrun life. So it's everywhere we go. And Jasper learns that, he was running somewhat from environmental destruction, but he found that in North Carolina as well. When you're clearing land and that sort of thing, it affects everyone who lives on the land, people and animals. And then they move back to West Virginia. They get work at a vineyard where they're feeling like they're growing grapes and, producing something, so they have something to show for their work. But then, some trouble happens there as well. So, life is not an easy thing. And we all kind of have to pull together to get through it. And I feel like my characters learn that lesson as they go.
And speaking about learning lessons, my goodness, you clearly did a lot of education to learn about the things you wrote about, not
Sure.
just environmentally, not just the actual science of coal mining, and stripping mines and mountain removal. And then you go to North Carolina and we learn about the killdozer, which is, the beast that takes down a lot of trees and puts up tacky homes. And then you go to a viticulture. You're learning about winemaking. Tell us a little bit about the research behind what you had to learn in order to write this and to become the authority that you are.
Oh, authority is a big word.
Well,
I don't know. I can absorb that, but yes.
Well, the fact is you can't just write and make stuff up. So if
Right.
you're going to be a writer, and many of our listeners are aspiring writers, let them know about the research that goes into knowing enough to sound intelligent as you write about a subject that you might not know as much about.
It's called authenticity.
There you go. Right.
If a writer owes the reader authenticity,
That's
if the writer is going to traipse into some realms that, there might be people out there who know more about this than you, so you definitely want to not look dumb. So, doing the research.
It's important to do the research, not just for authenticity, but also, like you said, you owe it to the reader. I can't recall the author, you might recall Robert, who wrote a story, and he had a tractor in it, and he talked about the John Deere's red belly, and everybody knows that's a farm-all tractor.
Yeah.
John Deere is green and yellow, and that stirred up a lot of trouble. Or maybe it was the other way around. He wrote about a farm-all and called it green. I don't know, but that was you. So you owe it to your reader to do the research. And I dove in. I grew up in West Virginia, so I knew a bit about coal mining, but I didn't know a lot about mountaintop removal. I grew up during underground coal mining. And mountaintop removal, oh my gosh, if you fly over the state of West Virginia or Kentucky, you'll be blown away by what you see. There's just lots of, I call them scabs. That's what it looks like, yellow
it's
dirt.
devastation.
And mountains don't grow back, y'all. Once they're gone, they're gone. So, it causes a lot of trouble. And they pump in chemicals to do what they call fracking, which is fracturing the coal so that you can scoop it up easier. Instead of having to dig it out, you can just scoop it right up. And it makes things go a lot faster, and we use a lot of electricity, all of us, myself included. I love my power.
Yeah, we're using it right now.
Exactly, right? So we need that power. We want that power, and there are other ways to get it. And when I started looking into, how can we overcome this, I started learning about wind power. Well, wind power has its downfalls, too. Everything has its downfalls. But wind is renewable energy. And I did learn in my research, and I kind of had a little bit of that in the novel, but not like an informational dump, which it's important not to do.
Yeah, no info dumps.
Right, no info dumps. Right?
Yeah.
You got to sprinkle the info. I tell my students, like salt, sprinkle it throughout your story. Don't dump it all in one corner, because that would ruin your casserole, right? If you have
And
a big
remember,
salty
you
corner.
can always add more, but you can't take it out.
Exactly right. I don't know. I use my delete button an awful lot. But yeah, and so I did the research there. I talked to a gentleman who I acknowledged in my acknowledgments, Johnny Holcomb, who knows a lot about wind energy, and so he gave me information. And then, when I wrote the story about the, I don't think it's a spoiler alert, I have a character who loses his leg, and they try to reattach it, and so I spoke with an orthopedic surgeon. And people want to give you this information. Everyone likes to talk about what they do and share their knowledge with you. So I tell my students, don't hesitate. If you're writing a story set in a bakery, go to a bakery. Ask them, if you can come behind the counter and see how the donuts are made, so to speak. We need to learn these things before we write about them. That way we can write about them authentically, like you mentioned, Robert.
And pay attention to the atmosphere and how it smells and the sounds that are going on in the bakery and all of these things that help contribute to the reader being there when they're reading the book or story.
Yeah, it makes it real. It comes real to them, yeah.
And speaking about tasteful beans,
Oh, yeah. Our official sponsor of RedPubPod is Tasteful Beans Coffee House in downtown Hickory. Let's do a nod out to good old Scott Owens down there, and go down to Tasteful Beans and get you a cup of Ethiopian coffee and some kind of scone or some kind of muffin. They got wonderful chicken salad there, wonderful tuna salad.
actually, Rhonda and I typically go there on Saturdays. What is it that you typically order? Ooh, the bagel.
Yeah, bagel, lox and bagel is so good, and their coffee with the pumpkin cream, fresh pumpkin cream. Yeah.
Oh my
So
God, that sounds good.
It is delicious. Shall we call this off right now and head that way?
I was gonna suggest to Patty that one day we take the whole podcast and go down to Tasteful
That
Beans
would
and
be
do a
fun.
podcast from
Oh, that would be fun.
the dining room there.
Count
So
me in.
we could eat and drink and have people just come by, you know.
Well, they've done live podcasts in front of audiences before, so maybe Scott might let us do that one evening. That could be kind of fun.
We might want to think about doing that when Rhonda's book premieres. That would be a good thing. We could do a premiere podcast party.
That would be good.
Wouldn't that be neat? Would you people out there in podcast land love that? Just write us an email, send us an email, or like this podcast and subscribe and share it with your friends.
All 12 of you. Please
Yeah.
By the way, I do want to talk about one of our authors, and I know Stewart won't mind, but this is where editing comes in.
Stuart Connolly loves to be talked about. To Stuart, there's no bad publicity.
And that's
Love you,
right.
Stuart.
His memoir called Offered in Secret, which, by the way, is really good. It's one of my favorite memoirs. He did have an area when we got it as a rough draft. We had to remind him that it was missing some authenticity, in that his book mentions somewhere in there that his first beater car ran out of oil, and he learned an important lesson to change his oil every 12,500 miles. And I was like, ooh,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah.
As somebody whose car did freeze because I did run out of oil, I happen to know that. That's like...
You couldn't even run one of those old 1960 things to 12,000 miles without changing the oil. Well, you could, but you'd be leaving a smoke trail everywhere you went around the county.
I had a 70s Vega that used more oil than gas. And it did run out of oil, and the block froze. And so I knew for a fact that 12,500 is probably pressing it. So, we let him know. He changed it accordingly. It's a good thing he didn't have other cars break down during the years.
The
But
devil's in the details.
devil's in the details. So again, I just want to commend you for, I knew that there was a lot of research that went on in there, and it was good for me because I like to learn as I read. And mountaintop removal, as bad as I've always known it is, you painted a picture of what it must be like to live and have to work around that.
Right, and I think that's the thing. We can read about a lot of these subjects, but unless we really experience them firsthand, and we can do that sometimes through our fictional characters. not everybody can travel across the world and visit all these different places. And you can, sure enough, go to Wikipedia and look up the information about them. But unless you have someone show you the example of what it's like to live, breathe, experience that life, it's just not quite the same. Fiction allows us to do that.
I believe that that's what drew me to read when I was a kid. Was growing up poor. We didn't get to go on vacations. We didn't get to go places. And 6 or 7 years old, you get a comic book that is the comic book version of the Iliad. And suddenly you're reading about these people who lived thousands of years before, and then suddenly you're introduced to different kind of books, and you're in places that you will never go. I have read about places that I will never be able to go, other planets, cultures that aren't real, beings that aren't similar to humans, because some author somewhere in his or her imagination was brilliant enough to make this so real. And I do the same thing with films. I watch films that are made in other countries to where I can experience what it's like to be in that country, but I've never gone there, and I probably never will. But a good writer, and this is for you guys out there who are wanting to write. We've touched on several things today. Authenticity, we've touched on resonance, telling a redemption story, creating conflict for characters that they have to solve, creating suspense. Another thing is putting them in these places that become real to them, to where they feel like they've gone somewhere they could never go. And I think that's what drew me to literature all my life.
And it's not lost on me, by the way, that your main characters followed the same trail that you and Randy did. Started in West Virginia, came to North Carolina, went back to West Virginia.
I skipped the Florida part.
Hey, that's part 2.
That's the next novel.
That's because of the deer flies down there in Florida. Because nobody can beat those deer flies down there. They start chomping on you, and you've had it. There's no redemption from that. So
to paraphrase Kurt Vonnegut, the palmetto bugs ate the last novel.
That's
ate the Florida chapters.
Yeah, and the alligators and all the other things that are down there. I mean, I've just visited Florida, and that was it for me. I'm like, this is a great place to visit, but I would not want to live here.
I love it. I love Florida. I love West Virginia. I love North Carolina. I love South Carolina. All the places I've lived, I loved the experience of being there, and there's so much good to say about each one of those states. And again, just like Romy discovered, you can't outrun trouble. You just have to, handle it as it comes to you. And it's going to follow you, I guess. I don't know that it really follows you. It's just that you go to fresh trouble.
I think that's one of the most popular conflicts in especially modern novels is characters that believe that a change of geographical location will oftentimes preclude them from having problems. And it happens in real life. I had a friend years ago who just got sick of living around here, could not meet the right woman, and I wanted to say, you're a drunk, dude. You drink too much, and you have a girlfriend for 3 weeks, and then she starts looking at what it's going to be like to live with an alcoholic. So he gets mad, and he moves to Texas. And, on his Facebook page one day, suddenly is in a relationship. And I'm like going, ooh, he found him a girl. 3 weeks later, it's complicated.
Sure is.
A week and a half later, single, and I'm texting him or talking to him on Messenger, and he's going like, the girls out here are the exact same way.
Oh, gee, I wonder why.
And I'm going like, dude, it's you. You need to hold that mirror up to yourself and look at who and what you really are. And that's what these stories kind of remind us to do. Is that we ourselves can't run from that stuff. It's us.
Yeah. I've got a question to ask you about marketing. And again, one of the reasons we love doing RedPubPod is in addition to sharing new books, but also the process of book writing and book making and publishing. And in this case, since this book will be out in a matter of weeks, what are your plans for marketing? And do you have any events planned?
Yeah, I have an event planned actually on November the 16th. That's on a Saturday at 3 o'clock at one of our favorite spots, which is Old Hickory Station here in Hickory. and that will be my launch party, and it's open to the public. I hope to see lots of you there, and I might even have some wine and cheese for you while you're there. So, yeah, there will be refreshments, and come because I'd love to tell you a story. I really would. I think that'll be fun. And then in addition to that, I want to do some readings at a couple of local wineries around the area and at the libraries around the area. And then I'm going to take the road on the show on the road, so to speak. And I'm going to visit some locations in West Virginia and in Florida. I have planned out already. So, and then hopefully South Carolina and Georgia en route. So, yeah, there's lots of places to come, and I hope you'll keep an eye on my Facebook page and on my blog at rhondabrowningwhite.com, and that way you can keep up with where I'll be and show up. I mean, you don't necessarily have to buy a book when you go to a reading. I know a lot of people think that if they come to a reading, they're pressured into buying a book. Come and let me tell you a story. Like I said, come and listen, join in, meet some people, and, there may or may not be refreshments depending on the location, but come and have a good time. And writers need readers, and we're just as happy if you go to the library and pick up our book there or get it on interlibrary loan. I mean, the librarians need something to do, so have them get the book through interlibrary loan. And yes, I'd love to sell you a signed copy. Buy two, because you got to give them a gift for Christmas, right? So go ahead and pick up 2 or 3 while you're there. But yeah, I mean, it's just come and enjoy. And I've had students ask me, what's it like to go to a reading? Which shocks me. I assumed that creative writing students would have already been to readings, but not always. So it's new to them. It's a very casual atmosphere. You don't need to rent a ball gown or a tux to come to a reading. You can wear your PJs. I'm not going to judge. Just show up and support us, and listen and enjoy your time there. That's what a reading is all about. It's just a lot of fun.
That's good to know. And I do realize that some people may listen to this podcast after November 16th, which is why it's super important to check out Rhonda's Facebook and website information, which, by the way, will be in the description of this pod.
Yes, we will mirror it on our site and, our Facebook page and stuff like that as well. So, but you're absolutely right about readings. Readings are really the most fun when lots of people attend. And you don't have to buy anything. You don't have to do anything. Just be a person sitting in a chair paying attention and listening and asking a question if you have one, especially if you're a writer, because right there you've got a professional writer in front of you that you can ask any question you'd like to ask. And it goes beyond that, where do you get your ideas type questions. Sure. But, why do you write in a particular voice? Like one of my questions is, as you said, that the writing style in this book is through 2 different points of view.
Correct.
You go back and forth between the male and the female, the married couple. In your past writing, your short stories and things, have you ever tried to use first person? Do you like to use one person's point of view throughout?
I like first person because I feel it's very intimate for the reader to get to know the character. But I also enjoy third person. I've written quite a few. And my short story collection is across the board. I think the only thing I don't have in the collection is second person. And second person is a little more difficult to write. Lori Moore does it incredibly well. If you want to learn how to write in second person, read Lori Moore, her how-to series. I forget the name of that. Self-Help, I believe, is the name of that fiction collection. And it's wonderful, and it's a lot of fun to read.
Can you remind people what that second person is? Remind people like Patty.
Yes, Patty. Okay, Patty. So second person is written toward you. So instead of saying, I went to the mall, you go to the mall today. You pick up a pair of shoes. You see if they fit, and of course they don't.
That's really dramatic.
It is more dramatic.
I have read that before, and
yes.
Now you're reminding me of how you feel like there's a sense of urgency when you read that.
You do.
I've written one story like that years ago, and the only magazine to publish it was a little scary magazine out of England. They snatched it up and loved it, and actually reprinted it in one of their anthologies. But I could not get a domestic publisher, because they go like, can't you change this to first person, or can't you make it third? And I go like, no, I'm playing with the third person, because this guy's girlfriend was killed in a robbery in a steakhouse, and he can't talk about it. He has to talk about it like he's somebody else. He has to look at it from outside himself, and that's what the second person kind of does. And the only ones that got it was these people with this little macabre press or something like that. They snatched it up, but that's the only time I've tried that. It was hard.
It is difficult. It's difficult to do, yeah. And actually, that's my students' assignment this week was to take a paragraph. We gave them the prompt that it's a party, and they're going to have their character go to the party, and they're going to write a paragraph in first person, then write from a different character's perspective in second person, and a different narrator's perspective in third person.
Wow, that's awesome.
So yeah, it's only a paragraph, so it's just 3 little paragraphs, but they can see the difference in the perspective of each of those points of view. So
I had a writing instructor one time have us rewrite Edgar Allan Poe's The Telltale Heart in a third person, and also from the point of view of the old man with the eye.
No.
So, so imagine the story being told from the point of view of the old man in the bed, and he hears the door creaking, and he sees the light come through the door. So you're telling it from that point of view, because what it is it's an exercise in perspective. Trying to re-envision the story from another angle,
Right.
And it helps tune your chops.
Yes.
Because you're taking something that is very famous and very well done, because Poe created the horror story as we know it way before anybody else. So that kind of stuff, that's good. I like that.
yeah, it's and I think if I were going to do a second class on creative writing, or when one's done, I think it would be a great idea to do a deeper dive into third person, because we just say third person point of view, but there are so many different points of view inside of third person.
Oh, wow.
You can do a
Yes.
classical omniscient, or a deep point of view, a close point of view, some people call it, in third person. There's just so many different ways. I don't want to say as many different points of view as there are people, but pretty darn close. There are a lot of different points of view to write from. So
Who was the guy that wrote the Owen Meany? John Irving.
Yes.
John Irving is the most wonderful writer when it comes to third person omniscient. This narrator who knows what's going on in everybody's head. And you'll have 5 people together, and whoever this narrator is will be inside of each person's head by turn. You're like, Tara couldn't stand how Rhonda sat there, but Rhonda thought that Tara was probably the worst dressed at the table, and you'd go like, whoa! And I mean, he is wonderful
incredible.
at it,
He really
and
is.
he's been known to write a book and then just rewrite the whole thing from another point of view.
Wow.
He's written one from first person and then gone back and rewrote the book in third. Wow. And he wrote one and then he started it over again, starting from the end and telling the story backwards. I mean, that's what a genius Irving is. Then you just pray that you could get that kind of talent.
Stewart O'Nan's another one who does that. He
my
writes
God,
the
yes.
end in the very beginning. You know what happens right when you start to read the story, but then the rest of the book is, how it got to that point. And he's amazing with
That's
that.
what the first book of his I ever read was The Night Country.
Oh, that's a scary one.
And that's
too.
that's the one with the school bus full of children and stuff. And then there's the Last Night at the Red Lobster.
Last Night at the Lobster.
Yeah, that's those are wonderful books.
Ocean State does the same thing.
Yeah.
In the very first page, you know who the murderer is and who was killed and all that, but the rest of the story is the how of it and the why of it.
And the after
It's amazing.
effects.
Right.
The after
The
effects.
after effects, yes.
How everybody is hurt by it, traumatized by it, and how
It's
they deal
talent.
with it. I mean, it's just like it's novels that you've never really read before.
Snow Angel that was made into a movie.
Yep.
Both the movie and in the beginning of the movie you hear the gunshots and you know something's happened and you see the reaction on people's faces, but then the whole rest of the book and the whole rest of the movie is how it led up to that point. So it's just amazing to be able to write that way. It's just, I love that. That's a lot of talent. But those different points of view, when I did Romeo and Jasper, like I said, I wrote those. Actually started out, chapter 1 in this book was previously published as Bondservant, and that was Romy's story. Well, months down the road, and I mean probably a year or so down the road, I kept thinking about Jasper, and what he would think about all that, because, it was his wife. And so I wrote a story called The Big Empty, or A Big Empty, told on Jasper's point of view, and that's chapter 4 in this novel. And then those two just kept back and forth in my head, so I'll let them say what they had to say to each other, but two totally different points of view, both told in first person. And sometimes that was difficult in the writing, while we're talking about writing, because I did not want Jasper's voice to sound like Romy's voice and vice versa. And obviously I'm not a man, so having to write from the point of view of a male, sometimes I would write something down and I would think, wait, a guy wouldn't think like that. A guy's not going to think, oh, my sweet baby, They're going to think my kiddo, so to speak. They just have a different way of looking at life than, a woman does. So there was that back and forth.
As a reader, listening to Romy's point of view and then Jasper's point of view, and I know some of the secrets maybe that Romy might have, and as you're reading Jasper's part, part of me is screaming, but Jasper, you don't know what happened. And then, of course, I'm talking to my characters, your characters. You did a good job.
Thank you.
Because I'm able to kind of understand why Jasper feels this way, but he doesn't have the information that I have, because I got that from Romy. So very convincing and very well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, see, that's the work.
Yeah.
That's the work that goes in. When you talk about rewriting, revising, you're talking about developmental work. That stuff rises from that developmental work. And you potential authors out there, that writing, rewriting, re-envisioning, revising, that's where this cream rises to the top of your resonation points, the things that causes the reader to take part in what's going on. Have you ever read Russell Banks' book, Trailer Park?
I have not. I've read Russell Banks. I've read Cloud Splitter and Rule of the Bone.
Oh, Trailer Park is wonderful. It's a bunch of stories
Put you on my list, Patty.
that all take part in the same trailer park. So something happens one night in the trailer park, and we get a story from each trailer about what happened. So it's all these different points of view from these different people who are evidently, they're very impoverished and they're very, uneducated and undereducated. But Banks does something there that, Cloud Splitter is brilliant. It's one of the most brilliant novels I've ever read. But this work he does in Trailer Park is just absolutely astounding.
So it's like short stories?
Yes.
Oh, man. I want to read that one.
And they all have to do with what happens one night in this trailer park, and they're tied together. So it's the same story being told several times, but it's from inside these different trailers in different parts of the park with different people.
Different perspectives.
who are experiencing the same thing, and that's as far as I'm going to go because it's just wonderful.
We'll definitely have to check that out. By the way, we could go on forever.
Yes, we could.
Rhonda, you're just an amazing author, instructor,
Thank you.
and somebody who is probably going to be incredibly influential for many aspiring authors, not just in your class, but anybody who listens to this pod. We'd love to have you again.
Thank you.
Simply because you're just educational and entertaining and an extremely strong author. But I know we need to wrap this up. I do want to encourage people to go to Rhonda's Facebook page as well as to her blog, which I will definitely put in the description. And Robert, where could we buy her book for pre-sale, which we'll do shortly, by the way?
Rhonda, as soon as you approve your cover, your book will go up for sale on the site as a pre-sale.
And where does one buy that?
At redhawkpublications.com.
Woohoo.
Yeah, we're getting ready to have a sale. Don't tell anybody. We're going to have a little holiday sale starting soon.
So 12 listeners out there, please make sure you check out our sale and tell your friends. By the way, when you go to our RedPubPod on YouTube, make sure you like, share, and subscribe. And make sure you check out all of our social media.
And are you going to put like an image of Rhonda up on this pod?
Yeah.
To where if somebody sees her at Tessville Beans, they can come up to her and say, "Let me buy you a coffee."
Yeah, if you come Saturday mornings, we kind of have a standing appointment. Except for this past Saturday, I couldn't go because of husband. But you know what? We're there usually.
See, Steve doesn't listen to the podcast, so we can talk junk about him. My wife doesn't listen either, so.
But yeah, please, by all means, Tasteful Beans is our sponsor. They're our friends. So enjoy checking them out and maybe doing a Rhonda sighting. Anything else?
And you folks just have got a joy coming to you.
Yeah,
when you have an author
really
who
do.
works as hard as Rhonda Browning White has worked on this novel, to where it resonates and to where the redemption matters, you're going to have a marvelous time. It's a joy to be given literature like this. So thank you very much for
feel
writing
blessed.
it. And we look
feel
forward
blessed. Thank you.
to more work from you, and especially if we can help guide you to fame and fortune. We would love that.
I'll sign up for that one.
So you folks out there in podcast land, thank you for joining us on Red Pub Pod. I'm Robert Knipe with Patty Thompson.
Reminding Rhonda that she has one more thing to say.
What does she have to say?
Oh, Red Pub Pod.
RedPubPod.
Oh, she's a professional.
She's a pro. So thanks very much for listening. Please
Thank you for
listen
having
to us more. Oh, thanks for coming. We really love you. And you guys take it easy out there in podcast land. Be safe, be kind, and make sure you vote. All right.
Red Pub Pod.
Red Pub Pod.
Bye.
Bye.
This has been
Red Pub Pod.
RedPubPod.
Red Pub Pod.
Red Pub Pod.
a podcast
Red Pub Pod.
RedPubPod.
from Red Hot Publications.
Red Pub Pod.
Red Pub Pod.
Oh, she's a professional.
She's a pro.